I need to tell you about something I watched this week because it completely reframes a story the football world has been getting wrong for months. Everyone keeps talking about the Cleveland quarterback room like it's a powder keg, like it's some tense standoff waiting to explode the second training camp opens. That's the narrative that sells clicks. That's the narrative outside voices keep pushing because controversy travels faster than truth. But what I actually saw from Shedeur Sanders this week tells a completely different story. And once you hear it, I think you're going to walk away seeing this kid in a whole new light. Here's what nobody wants to talk about when they're breaking down a young quarterback. Everyone obsesses over arm strength, over pocket movement, over how quickly a guy processes a blitz. Those things matter, sure. But there's a piece of building a franchise quarterback that almost never gets discussed because it doesn't show up in a highlight reel, and it definitely doesn't trend the way a 40-yard touchdown throw does. I'm talking about leadership, real leadership, not the kind you fake for a press conference, the kind that gets built quietly in empty gyms in Miami during the dead of the offseason when there isn't a single camera rolling, the kind that gets built at a youth camp on a random weekend when a guy could easily be anywhere else, resting up, doing literally anything other than standing in the summer heat surrounded by hundreds of kids screaming his name. And that's exactly where I found Shedeur this week. Let me paint the full picture for you first, because context is everything here. People inside that Browns building have described this offseason as one of the most genuinely positive stretches this roster has experienced in years. We're talking about players organizing their own workouts on their own dime, flying out to the same city, coordinating their entire summer just to be together and grind before training camp even opens. Nobody mandated that. There's no line in a playbook that forces players to do that. That's culture forming organically. That's chemistry building itself from the ground up. And whether people want to admit it or not, chemistry wins just as many football games as raw talent does. Shedeur sat down recently and opened up about exactly this. He talked about his own youth camp. He talked about training down in Miami with his teammates, guys like Jeudy stepping up to be part of it. And he talked candidly about what it's actually like navigating year 2 in this league after coming in as a rookie under a mountain of outside expectations nobody his age should reasonably have to carry. And honestly, listening to how he broke all of it down, especially his relationship with fellow quarterback Dillon Gabriel, none of it sounded like a guy who's rattled. None of it sounded like someone insecure about where he stands on that depth chart. It sounded like a young man who has already locked in on exactly who he wants to be, both as a competitor and as a human being. And he is not letting outside noise shake that foundation even a little. Let's start with the camp itself, because this is where the emotional core of the story actually lives. When he was asked what the day was really about, Shedeur didn't give one of those rehearsed, media-trained non-answers that athletes hide behind. He said it started with the heart. He looked around at the entire atmosphere, the music, the kids wearing his merch, and most importantly, he acknowledged the small army of people working behind the scenes who made the whole event possible in the first place. He said it took real teamwork just to make that day happen, and admitted he felt genuinely amazed watching it all come together. Not the performative amazement athletes fake for a camera crew. Actual, honest amazement that an idea sitting in his own head had somehow turned into something real that hundreds of children got to experience firsthand. Then it got even more interesting. They brought up the moment the kids first spotted him and basically swarmed him like he was a rock star walking into a stadium. Instead of deflecting with some generic, humble non-answer, he leaned into it with humor, joking that in his own mind he already sees himself as a superhero. But then his tone shifted, and he said something I think gets completely overlooked when people talk about professional athletes. He pointed out that guys in his position often live strangely isolated lives. Sit with that for a second. These are people surrounded by fame, surrounded by millions of eyes on them every single Sunday during the season. And yet in a strange, almost cruel way, they're cut off from real, unfiltered community. Practice facilities, hotel rooms, film rooms, private training centers. It's a bubble, and it's a bubble most fans never think about because from the outside, it just looks like glamour. Shedeur basically admitted that days like this camp are his way of physically breaking out of that bubble and reconnecting with the people who remind him why he plays the game in the first place. That hit me harder than I expected, because it's easy, almost lazy, to assume athletes run these camps purely for image, for brand building, for a good headline. And sure, for some guys, maybe that's exactly what it is. But listening to the way he talked about it, the inspiration flowing in both directions, the kids feeding off his energy, and him feeding right back off theirs, it felt like something deeper than a marketing stunt. It felt like something he actually needs, not something his team told him to schedule. Now let's shift to Miami, because this part of the story tells you the most about where this Browns roster is heading mentally, and honestly, it might be the most important thread in this entire piece. Shedeur confirmed that a group of players, not just him alone, made the trip down to Miami to train together over the offseason. Not everyone could make the schedule work, and he was quick to say that was completely fine. No hard feelings toward anyone who couldn't be there. But for the guys who did show up, he described it as an experience that forged a completely different kind of bond, something existing entirely outside the facility. Outside meetings, outside scheduled practice reps, outside everything structured that normally defines life inside an NFL building. Think about how genuinely rare that is in professional sports. Guys who are already competing against each other week in and week out for reps, for roster spots, for playing time, voluntarily choosing to spend their own downtime building relationships with each other instead of distancing themselves. That's not something a coaching staff can install through a team meeting. You can paint the word brotherhood across a locker room wall as many times as you want, but real brotherhood only gets forged through voluntary sacrifice, through guys giving up their own free time because they believe in something bigger than their individual stat line. He talked about how funny, how real those moments get when you're just hanging out with your teammates in a completely different environment, away from football, away from cameras. He said those moments create real memories, real bonds, the kind of thing that can't be replaced or replicated in a facility hallway. He made it clear he was genuinely thankful the trip happened, and that everyone who made the effort to be there walked away with something valuable from it. This is exactly the kind of thing that never shows up in a box score. It doesn't show up in a mock draft grade or a preseason power ranking. But ask any veteran who's ever been part of a genuinely championship caliber locker room, and they will tell you, without hesitation, that this is the intangible glue that turns a collection of talented individuals into an actual team capable of winning in December and January. Here's a question I found genuinely compelling. They asked him how much easier it is this year, organizing something like that Miami trip compared to last year, when he was walking in as a total rookie for the very first time. And his answer here might be one of the more mature things I've heard a young quarterback say in a long time. He explained that logistically, pulling something like this together isn't hard at all. It's just conversation, just communication, texts, and phone calls. What's actually changed is the space everyone is now operating in. As a team, as individuals, there's simply a different level of confidence this time around. And then he said something a lot of young players never fully grasp until it's already too late for them. You cannot walk into this league and start dictating things immediately, no matter how talented you are or how high you were drafted. Respect inside an NFL locker room has to be earned, slowly, deliberately. You cannot force it, you cannot demand it. And if you try walking and acting like you already have it before you've put in the actual work, veterans will see straight through that in about 5 minutes. He talked about understanding the rhythm of the league, about how it genuinely takes time and real relationship building before players are willing to fully get on the same page with you as a young quarterback. And once that trust gets established, once that respect becomes mutual instead of assumed, everything else starts flowing naturally instead of feeling forced or performative. That is not rookie talk. That is the mindset of someone who is actually paying attention to his surroundings instead of assuming his talent alone should hand him automatic leadership status inside that building. And honestly, that level of self-awareness this early in a career is exactly what separates the guys who become long-term franchise cornerstones from the guys who flame out because they never learned how to read a room. Now let's talk about his favorite part of the whole camp, because this single detail says more about his character than almost anything else in this entire story. You'd expect a guy in his position to point straight to the highlight plays, the drills, maybe even just seeing his own face plastered across all that merchandise. Instead, he specifically pointed to the people working behind the scenes. The organizations, the coaches, the volunteers, the parents, everyone who put in the invisible labor required to make a single day like that run smoothly. He talked about wanting to make sure the kids had good gear, wanting to make sure there wasn't trash scattered across the field by the end of it, wanting to constantly find ways to improve the entire experience for next time. And he made a specific point of saying this was only the first one, framing the whole event as the beginning of something he plans to keep building year after year. There was also a lighter moment where he talked about giving away a chain during one of the camp activities, describing it as just something fun he thought would be cool. He admitted it actually became one of the harder logistical pieces to figure out because he didn't want it to feel like some cheap, simple race. He wanted real competition, fair competition, something that actually felt earned by whichever kid won it. And that tiny detail, small as it seems on the surface, tells you exactly how he approaches everything he touches. Even a kids camp giveaway, he wanted it to genuinely mean something. Now let's get into the mindset conversation, because training camp is right around the corner, and this is where a lot of fans are going to be watching him closest. When asked about his mentality heading into year 2, he gave an answer that sounded far less like a football cliche and far more like an actual personal philosophy. He said his mindset is simply how he thinks every single day, constantly trying to become the best version of himself, whether that's on the field, off the field, out in the community, emotionally, spiritually, across every category of life. It wasn't some scripted, we're taking it one game at a time, answer athletes give to fill airtime. It was a young man describing an internal standard he holds himself to regardless of whatever chaos is happening around him. They also asked him about his own childhood, whether he remembers attending camps like this one growing up. And this is where the conversation turned a little more personal, a little more human. He talked about his own father essentially running everything back then, and how now, standing on the other side of it, as an adult putting on his own camp, he finally understands just how genuinely difficult that job actually was. Managing hundreds of kids, handling dozens of wildly different personalities, coordinating parents, coordinating logistics down to the smallest detail. He called it draining, honestly difficult work, and expressed real respect for anyone out there running organizations or foundations like that on a regular basis. That's not something you hear often from a young athlete still actively building his own legacy. Most guys in his exact position stay locked entirely forward, chasing the next milestone. He took a moment to actually look backward and give credit to the people who quietly made his entire path possible in the first place. Now let's talk about the quarterback room dynamic, because I know this is the part a lot of you have genuinely been waiting for. They asked him directly what it says about him and Dillon Gabriel, that the two of them, technically competing against each other for the exact same job, chose to travel to Miami together and helped pull the whole team closer together in the process. And his response here was calm, measured, and honestly pretty impressive given everything swirling around that quarterback room from the outside. He said it's the same thing he's been saying since day one. Both of them are simply trying to become the best versions of themselves, and neither one is going to let anything external interfere with that pursuit. He described a mutual level of respect existing inside that quarterback room, explaining that neither of them lets emotion creep into things outside their control. Their focus stays locked entirely on getting better every single day through actual real work. He even gave a small, telling example, saying that if he sees something Dillon does especially well, he'll walk over and ask him about it directly. That kind of open, unguarded conversation is exactly what makes the whole dynamic function properly, instead of curdling into resentment. Now think about how differently this could have played out. Two young quarterbacks, both drafted with real expectations attached to their names, both fighting for the same long-term opportunity at the same position. That is a recipe for tension in a lot of organizations around this league. Instead, based on Shedeur's own words, it has turned into a relationship built on mutual respect and shared ambition, rather than jealousy or quiet resentment. Whether that fully survives once the pads actually come on and real, physical competition begins is something we'll only find out once training camp starts. But at the very least, the version of this dynamic he's describing publicly sounds a lot healthier than most outside commentary has been willing to admit. There's also a broader question worth sitting with here, about why he keeps showing up in so many different communities at all. He's run events in multiple different areas, and when asked why connecting with young people matters this much to him personally, his answer was simple, but genuinely felt. He said he likes walking around and connecting with people directly, face to face, no filter. He explained that the people who supported him throughout his own life are the entire reason he kept going when things got hard, and that giving back to those same kinds of communities that once lifted him up feels like something closer to an obligation than a choice. He talked about finding real, lasting fulfillment in watching these events come together successfully, and then almost immediately shifting his mindset toward how he can make the next one even better. Cleaner fields, smoother logistics, a genuinely improved experience for every kid who shows up. That right there is the mark of someone thinking long-term, not someone simply chasing a single feel-good headline for a day and moving on. They also asked him how he felt he'd personally improved over the past month. His answer, honestly, bordered on philosophical. He turned the question back around briefly, joking about whether the interviewer personally thought he'd improved, before settling into a genuine answer about improving in essentially every corner of his life. How he sleeps, how he breathes, how he hydrates, how he approaches his daily habits from the moment he wakes up. It wasn't about throwing mechanics or footwork drills at all. It was about total lifestyle refinement, the kind of unglamorous, unseen work that never shows up in game film but absolutely impacts performance across an entire 18-week season. And then there was one lighthearted moment near the very end when they asked about his favorite part of the summer so far, and he basically said every single day was his favorite day. Yesterday it was the team bonding trip. Today it's the camp. Tomorrow it'll be something else entirely. It sounds like a small throwaway line on the surface, but honestly, that kind of daily gratitude, that ability to find genuine appreciation in whatever's directly in front of him, instead of constantly chasing the next milestone or the next headline, is a mindset a lot of high-level competitors talk about needing, but very few actually manage to live out authentically, day after day. So here's where I land on all of this. Forget the outside noise for a second. Forget whatever narrative certain commentators keep trying to push about controversy, about doubt, about whether he truly belongs at the top of that quarterback depth chart heading into camp. What I watched in this interview was a young player who understands that leadership isn't something you announce in a press conference. It's something you demonstrate through consistent, unglamorous action. Showing up for community events, organizing voluntary team bonding trips on your own dime, respecting the slow process of earning trust inside a locker room instead of trying to force it through talent alone. Is any of that enough on its own to guarantee success once the season actually kicks off? Of course not. This league ultimately runs on results, on wins, on performance under real pressure in real games that count. But culture matters, chemistry matters. And based on everything Shedeur described here, in his own words, this Browns quarterback room, and honestly this entire roster, appears to be quietly building something genuinely positive heading into training camp, whether the outside world wants to acknowledge it or not. I'll be watching closely to see exactly how this all translates once real competition actually begins under the lights. But for right now, that's the story, straight from Shedeur Sanders himself.